Hello and welcome back to Bicycle Legs Talks Music and another special episode. And can you please welcome back to the channel my good friend and yours, Mr. Peter Kerr from Rock Daydream Nation. Peter, always a pleasure to have you on the channel.
Great to be on the channel again, Daniel. Nice to see you.
And tonight we're going to be looking at albums that have different covers or different names, or sometimes both, as we'll see with some of our examples, on the Australian version of the album than they did on the overseas version. So we're going to have 5 examples each, and we'll sort of discuss it as we go along. They're just going to be album covers that are, where they change the picture or they change the title or that sort of thing. So, just thought we'd have some interesting things to look at here. And Peter, why don't we get straight into it and go with your first example?
Yeah, so just a little bit of some caveats to this exercise. In some instances, I've got the American or the North Hemisphere version, and I'm sure Daniel, you'll put up the insert of the counterpart Australia and vice versa. So
Absolutely,
it's
yeah.
a bit of a mixture. So I thought I'd start off with some low hanging fruit, AC/DC. So this is their second album, TNT from
Yep.
1975. The first album was High Voltage in 1975. A lot of folks think, well, High Voltage was 1976. Well, 1976 High Voltage was a mismatch between TNT and High Voltage. So this is the Australian version of TNT. It's got I love it. I think it's Raw Bon Scott. It's got A Long Way to the Top, Rock and Roll Singer, The Jack Live Wire, TNT. Can I Sit Next to You, Girl, High Voltage, and School Days? So it's classic Bon. It's a classic pub rock AC/DC. Daniel, I know you're not a huge fan of AC/DC, but do you have a soft spot for the very early AC/DC
Yeah.
albums?
Look, if I'm going to listen to AC/DC at all, it's going to be TNT, High Voltage, that sort of thing. The stuff before Highway to Hell. I mean, Highway to Hell's okay, but the Bon Scott era is the stuff that, the Brian Johnson era stuff's the stuff that really kind of puts me off. But
Yeah. Um, Really funny. I got this from New Zealand. So this
mm,
is a New Zealand pressing of 1981. I would say it's probably for your audio files. It's probably not a near mint, but it's probably very good. Plus plus. I got it for like less than $100. It's on the red label, Albert. Now, the really expensive, if you're looking to Discogs, is the first pressing, which is called the Blue Roo label on the Albert. So if you get those pressings and they're in pretty good nick, Daniel, they can go anywhere from $500 to $1,000.
yeah,
And there's not that many because let's face it, you bought AC/DC albums in the 70s to take to a party and thrash it, not to
yeah,
hold it with gloves and keep it sealed and keep it in near mint condition. So it's as rare as hen's teeth to get a really good condition AC/DC album first pressing. But pretty decent. It's as I said, a New Zealand pressing, and it's a good album. I like it. I love those 70s albums with Bond, except No Substitute.
yeah, absolutely. And so the overseas, like TNT itself, didn't actually get released overseas, did it? It was
No,
High
no.
Voltage.
So it was High Voltage, and I haven't got the album, but I'm sure you'll put it up. And it's got a
Yeah.
photo of Angus by himself. And
Mm.
you'll find I think through this show, you'll find there's this common theme, especially with Australian albums, where they just do miss a meshing of songs between albums. They're got hybrids, and I'm not a big fan of that at all.
No, no. Well, the first example I'm going to bring, and I'll apologize in advance, some of my examples are going to be sort of double up examples in as much as I've got like two of basically the same thing. And the first one I'm going to go with is the Beatles. And we had a couple of like alternate covers with Beatles albums here in Australia. And the first one was their second album with the Beatles. That's the cover that most people know. That same photo shot with a slightly different design was also used on the US Meet the Beatles. It's an iconic album cover. It's been parodied so many times. I love this album cover to death. You know, it's great early Beatles too. But for some reason, when they released it in Australia, we got this, I think, much less impressive cover. We got this instead. It's like, yeah, it's just
What?
not as good, is it?
No, what happened? Yeah, I've seen that. It's not as.
Yeah,
It's kind of a little bit cartoonish, and I hate to say the word, a little juvenile, isn't it? It's
yeah,
really playing to the pre-teens,
it
where the
is.
other one is kind of like a very serious photographic study. It
Yeah,
looks like it's
absolutely.
very artistic.
Yeah, absolutely. It gets worse though, because the next year the Beatles would release, I think, a rather underrated album in their catalogue, which is Beatles for Sale. And again, I think that's a fabulous album cover. It's
Brilliant.
a, you know,
Yes.
it shows the Beatles as they were in late 1964, which is kind of exhausted, you know?
They look quite pissed off actually, don't they? They look
Yeah.
really a
So
little bit jaded. It's great.
that's the album cover again that, you know, the UK and Europe and all that sort of
Mm.
thing, they got with Beatles for Sale. What did we get? We got, I think, the most amateurish looking cover I've seen in a long time, and that's this.
I've
What's
got that as
that?
well. Yeah.
What is
Yep.
that? I mean, it looks
Yellow.
like,
Mm.
you know, it, and just four, you know, distinct cut apart photos. The other thing is too, the original Beatles for Sale was a gatefold,
Mm.
you know,
Mm.
and it was one of the very first pop albums to have a gatefold cover. And
That other Beatles, I've seen that
yeah,
on other bands. I've seen it's like a generic format, and I've seen it on the Hollies, Herman's
mm,
Hermits, in a very similar format. So I reckon whoever at the record company had this template, and they just inserted photos and changed the type print. Because I've definitely
yeah,
seen a Hollies and a Hermit's Hermit album, and some of those other Merseybeat in that, that look exactly the same.
yeah. So, but I mean, I don't know why they did it. That's the point. They had a perfectly good album cover. Why did they go around changing these Beatles album covers for Australia? It just makes no sense to me. And I think
Mm,
we'll find also, I've got at least one other example of this too coming up, is album covers in Australia where they cut back on things in as much as, like, if it was a gatefold sleeve, they would cut it back to just an ordinary single sleeve and that sort of thing. That happened a lot here in Australia.
yeah, inexplicable, very hard to understand. And look, if anybody does know the reason, please put a comment on the show. We'd love to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Okay.
what's your second example?
Well, Deep Purple, one of my favorite bands of all time. The third album released internationally, which is called Deep Purple, self-titled, which is also a recent show of yours, I think about a
Indeed, it
month
was.
ago.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Check it out. Very good show. And there was a very intricate work of art by a painter, I think a Dutch painter called Hieronymus Bosch, called The Gardens of Earthly Delights. But in Australia, we just get a plain purple cover.
Mm,
So this is the Mark One lineup where you didn't have any Ian Gillan, you didn't have Roger Glover, you had Rod Evans and Nick Simcore. So not a bad album. I don't mind Mark One. It's really Richie Blackmore's trying to find his sound. He's not the guitar hero. Probably the star performers in this band are John Lord and Ian Pace. They're virtuoso right from the word go, and some pretty decent songs. Like they do a lot of cover versions, like um, Lalina by Donovan is one that they've done. A lot of instrumentals. There's a little bit of padding. It's a little bit psychedelic meets hard rock. The Painter is probably a very decent song, and also April. So it's not the pyrotechnics that you would expect within rock and Machine Head or Burn, or as you get into the 70s, it's a completely different outfit. Rod Evans was very much a crooner comparative to Ian Gillan. It's a very different band. But album covers, it's like chalk and cheese, where you've got a very intricate painting. And Bosch did a number of other paintings that ended up on album covers. I think Black Sabbath's Greatest Hits on 7 records, if you look that up, that's a painting. And a lot of it is very satanic and evil, and got like sort of grotesque sort of works of warfare. But they're very much very intricate works of art. But this one, we, you know, in Australia, we just get a plain shiny purple album. I mean, it suits the... I can understand why they put purple. Oh, Deep Purple, let's put a purple album. So shiny, you can see your reflection.
Yeah, yeah. No, we did tend to get those laminated covers in the late 60s and early 70s. But yeah, again, you know, if I may quote your good self, it's a real head scratch. Why did they change it? I mean, you had this great, I mean, another thing that will come up, certainly in one of my examples later on, is a bit of censorship. So maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know, but maybe they thought the artwork was a little too graphic or that sort of thing. But I don't know. I like and I love Mark One Deep Purple. It's not my favorite Deep Purple, but I really think it's underrated and I enjoy it a lot. So
yeah, I like it. I think it's very underrated. I agree.
So when you were talking earlier about my recent panel show where we were talking about self-titled albums that aren't debuts, um, Tom Curlis, our friend Tom Curlis, brought this album up. And I'll put it up on the screen because, again, I don't have the overseas versions of this album. But it was we were talking about Traffic's second album, which is simply called Traffic. But in talking about that, we had to talk about Traffic's first album. Now, Traffic's first album was called Mr. Fantasy in the UK and Europe, and it was called Heaven is in Your Mind in North America. And they had two completely different album covers and they had slightly different track listings. Now, Australia had both of those to choose from and went with neither. Instead, what they did was they took a picture. I'll have those pictures up on the screen. You should have already seen those. They took the Mr. Fantasy cover and like focused on just a part of that cover and used that as the album cover and changed the name of the album as well. Didn't call it Mr. Fantasy, didn't call it Heaven is in Your Mind, just called it Traffic. So
what do you think of the font of Traffic?
well, I mean, this album is from 1967, so you can tell what they're going for.
It's kind of stretched out, isn't it? Sort of, yeah.
It's got that kind of Summer of Love thing going to it. And, you know, I mean, this is a very psychedelic album and it's really, really good. But then in 1968, the next year, so this is track listing wise, this is the same as the UK version called Mr. Fantasy.
Yeah.
So, but we
is that a
called
first
it
pressing?
It is indeed on the old Festival Records label.
Wow, that's nice lacquered. Is that nice thick vinyl? I would imagine, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's really good.
Yeah,
it's in nice condition and still plays really nicely. But yeah, in 1968, the next year, Festival Records decided to release the US version of that album here in Australia. The album that was called Heaven is in Your Mind. And they used the picture for that album. But did they call it Heaven is in Your Mind? No. They called it Mr. Fantasy. It's very confusing.
That's extremely confusing, folks.
Yeah. So that's what we got here. And so when the second Traffic album came out, which was simply called Traffic, well, we couldn't call it that here because they'd already used it for the original Mr. Fantasy. So we got Traffic 2.
I'm really confused.
Same album cover as the second Traffic album, which is again simply called Traffic, but they had to put this graphic on it to say, no, it's Traffic 2. So
Hate the font on that too.
yeah,
Ah.
so yeah, that was a really confusing sort of period with those whole Traffic albums. And again, why did the record company do that? I have no idea.
Yeah, look, Festival did release a lot of, I don't know if it was a lot of, but some international artists. I think from memory, they actually released a couple of Who releases. So
Mm,
maybe it's just a local record company exerting their influence and wanting to just put some local flavor, saying, we've got the local distribution rights. Well, therefore, a point of differentiation is we'll do our own thing. I don't
yeah.
know. Very strange.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean the original Traffic albums were on Island Records
mm,
in the UK and Europe, so um,
cheaper to do it locally and just put local, covers. I don't know. Weird.
yeah, absolutely.
Well, the next one is a prime example where there's meddling and differences between the northern and the southern hemisphere. We all love the Angels, and we're all aware that Angels in America were called Angel City, and later, especially in the late 80s, they were called the Angels from Angel City, which is even a worse name, all because they wanted to differentiate themselves from a band called Angel, which was on this Casablanca label, sort of label mates to Kiss. Personally, I think they should have stuck with the Angels because I think over time people would have realized they're two completely different bands, meat and
Mm,
potatoes. So the Angels get signed to Epic Records. They leave Albert, the Albert label, which is a big mistake. I think they should have stayed on the Albert label under the guidance of Vander and Young, and may have gone on to an AC/DC career, but that's probably a what if episode. They signed to Epic Records, and they put out an album called Night Attack.
mm,
This comes out in circa 1980. Now, a little bit of story about Night Attack. In 1979, there was a New Year's Eve concert in front of the Opera House, and it was very unruly. People were grogging on. Rolf Harris got attacked. Should have been attacked
good.
a bit more. Yes.
Mm,
But for some reason, and this is in the days where beer cans, bicycle legs, were tinnies,
mm,
not cans as like aluminium cans. And you had a lot of drunken hooligans that were just causing lots of problems for the various acts on this, New Year's Eve concert, pelting at Rolf Harris, pelting at the various acts. And Doc Neeson got hit in the head midway through the performance. And he was knocked out unconscious for a short period of time. So that's where the name Night Attack comes from. I love this album cover, Daniel. It
mm.
shows the exuberance and the vitality of Doc Neeson. Um, you know, it's like red. It's like red hot. You can tell that this album, I want to listen to it,
Mm.
and it's got some great songs on it. Angel City do their version, and this just looks terrible.
That's horrible. It's awful.
Yes, it looks like that cheap 1977 Star Wars ripoff called Laser Blast. Are you a Star Wars fan? Are you
Oh
familiar?
yeah,
There was a
absolutely.
movie called Laser Blast that came out a year later, which was like a cheapy ripoff. And
Yeah.
this guy, the yeah, it just looks like the lasers coming from his eyes. It's terrible. It's garish, and not only that, the song listing is a mishmash of Night Attack and some other albums. So it's comes into that hybrid topic that I just absolutely hate. So that's the back of that album cover. It's not too bad. That's a live
Yeah.
photo, but this is the win for me.
Yeah.
The original Night Attack. And it's a pretty strong album. Do you have this album, Daniel?
Yeah, I've got pretty much everything of the Angels up to about 1990, I think. So, um, you know, I've always wondered why Martin compares the Angels with AC/DC, because to me they don't sound, they're both hard rock bands, and that's kind of where the similarity ends. For me, anyway. I find the Angels to be much more substantive than AC/DC, but that's my hot take for the night. I love the Angels. I think they're great.
Yeah, yeah. I think on a lyrical basis, one is street poetry and one is more socially observant. Like, I think Doc definitely goes into a lot of topics that Bond would never go to. Bond basically talks about life on the road, the rock and roll lifestyle, just what's
Mm,
around him. But Doc has a bit more of a broader view. What's happening
yeah,
in Marseille? What's history, science fiction? I think he's a very well-read person, and they're kind of a bit deeper. But it's not to say it's like apples and oranges. And I don't really like comparing bands because I both like them
yeah.
immensely. But I think we both agree um, that
Yeah.
rules. That's
Yeah,
horrible.
and that's horrible. Yeah, that's just awful.
Yeah, it just looks like bad horror or bad science fiction.
Yeah.
And Epic just completely mismanaged them. The Angels went on some really bad tours. They were on they were supporting a band called Triumph, big in Canada, barely got arrested in Australia. They supported the Kinks, which is an unusual billing, and got kicked off because they were playing too well and getting too much of a response. So the Ray Davies wanted them off. They had a lot of horrible luck. They should have been huge. But anyway,
Yeah.
that's life.
I'm just gonna quickly ask you to hold those covers up again, and I just want to make a comment. First, the Australian one. That looks like he's on stage, leaping, doing that sort of thing. That looks great. It looks like an action picture,
And it's red
like of
hot.
him on
It's
stage. Yeah,
hot.
absolutely.
It generates heat.
The other one, the US one, he looks like a butterfly that's been pinned to a board. He doesn't look
Yeah.
like he's in action at all. He looks like completely static, and
Or
it's horrible.
bad Richard Simmons exercise videos. Like let's do our star jumps.
Yeah.
It's just terrible. So look, did you think like we're of a similar age and we grew up with a lot of these bands and from afar we watched with interest how they were conquering or trying to conquer the rest of the world. Do you think there was just a fair assumption that anything, if they went to America and whatever they would do with the American record company was better? Because there was a bit of a cultural cringe, wasn't it? Like, I
Yeah.
think that we didn't realize that we did things in Australia really well. And this
Mm,
whole, I think it was a furphy that, to go to America and get signed to a big record company, they would do the right thing and everything would be in the right place. And this is an example where the record company, the big epic record company, just did it completely wrong.
yeah, absolutely. I think AC/DC got very lucky because
Lucky.
overseas they signed with Atlantic. And I think Atlantic were one of the few really artist-friendly labels, certainly back then in the 70s and that sort of thing. And I think they really sort of, hit the jackpot by signing with Atlantic Records. And I think that helped them. But even then, it took them, several years to sort of conquer America. It really wasn't until Highway to Hell that they really broke through.
Yeah,
So,
look, to get it signed on Atlantic is a huge leg up. And they definitely had a lot of people pushing them on the A&R. But I think that this record company, Epic for the Angels, maybe just didn't know what to do with them and they just weren't necessarily pushed. And you hear in a lot of stories where they had the right people and then there's been a takeover and it's a
yeah,
change of management, a change of personnel, and, they dropped the ball.
yeah,
So,
absolutely. So, yeah, it's an interesting thing to sort of think about. So my next example is going to be one of these ones. I've actually got two examples here again, and it's going to be where the covers are basically the same, but for Australia, they changed the name of the album. In particular, they gave the album a name where it was originally self-titled. So the first one I'm going to look at is, and I'll put it up on the screen here now, is Suzi Quatro's debut album, which for most of the rest of the world was simply called Suzi Quatro. But here in Australia, she'd had a big hit with the song Can the Can. So when the Australian version came out, they called it Can the Can. So
I love that album cover. I've got that album,
yeah, it's a
and
great album.
it
It's a
is.
lot of fun.
But head scratch time. Huge in
Yeah,
the UK. She is kind of legendary. In America, could barely get arrested until, I keep on bringing up this story, she did this 7-episode cameo in Happy Days as Leva Tuscadero. So she walks down New York streets. They'll go, oh, Leva Tuscadero. They won't. And there may be some vague recollection of when she did that song with the guy from Smokey stumbling in. What was his name? Chris.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I can't
Yeah,
remember
you
his
know who
name,
I'm
but
talking about, which went
yeah,
top 5. But beyond that, she could barely get arrested.
yeah.
Um, I mean, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Joan Jett,
Mm,
Go-Go's. They talk about the Runaways should be in. Pat Benatar. Sorry, Susie was doing it years earlier. She was in girl garage groups.
yeah,
She's a groundbreaker. There would be none of those bands if it wasn't for her. There'd be
yeah.
no Blondie.
Absolutely.
So she needs a due.
And
But that album cover's a bit rough and tough for America. I can
yeah,
understand. Put it up again. They look kind of hooliganish.
yeah,
She's very androgynous. She's got the levers, and kind of, it's almost like bikey, a little bit hooligan. UK would love that. They like it because they embrace that sort of imagery, like
yeah,
with their suedes, and even the sweet were a little bit tougher. But in America, that wouldn't wash.
yeah. Absolutely. And then the other example I have is the debut album by 10cc. Again, for most of the world, and again, I'll have the picture up on the screen. It's just called 10cc. But again, they had a huge hit with the song Rubber Bullets. So when this album got released in Australia, it got named Rubber Bullets. Like it's pretty small type on there, but they did have to add that, to sell the album here in Australia for some reason. Um, I'm a huge 10cc fan. I did a show with um, our friend Steve Schnee where we picked our favorite song from each 10cc album. Wonderful, wonderful band. I especially love these first four 10cc albums where they're the four-piece band, where you've got Godley and Cream are still in the band. Kevin Godley and Lol Cream. They would, after their fourth album, they would split off and become their own thing. And
Can I ask you a question? They're touring
yeah, yeah.
Australia. Should I see them? Um,
Well, I've heard they're a good show, but the only original member of 10cc left is Graham Gouldman. So you need to be kind of aware of that. But having heard that, definitely heard people say, "Oh, I was a bit dubious that they'd be like a tribute band or whatever," but they were actually really good. So
yeah. Would you see them if you're given a ticket?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm, yeah. All right.
All right. So your fourth example.
Jojo Zep and the Falcons.
Yes.
Joe Camilleri. I love them. One of my favorite albums is the 1979 album Screaming Targets, and I know Daniel will put
Mm.
the photo up, and it's got multiple like a film strip of a fighter pilot. I've got the American version, and it only picks up one panel of that album cover, and it's in black and white. Don't know if you've seen that version before.
No, I haven't actually.
Yeah, so that's the American version on CBS.
Okay.
So I love this album. And there is Joe Camilleri looking too cool for school.
I was just going to say, he looks very Devo in that picture with those
It,
glasses with the nose bit.
yeah. I never got to see them live. I think they did a reunion show 10 years ago in Melbourne, and I just couldn't get down there. I was thinking I like Joe Camilleri in the world of Jojo Zep because it's kind of punky, post-punky. It's kind of I like it's in that sort of ballpark of Joe Jackson, Graham Parker, and the Rumours, a little bit of Elvis Costello, but I don't like him as much when he's in the Black Sorrows because he just becomes totally Van Morrison
Mm.
and too much Van Morrison. And I used to see the Black Sorrows a hell of a lot in the day, but I just can't bring myself to buy any of their stuff now. I go to record fairs and I see Hold On To Me, Harley and Rose, and all those albums, and I pick it up and I go, oh, no, I don't think so. I find the Jojo Zep stuff a lot more interesting. What about you?
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I own one Black Sorrows album, and it's Hold On To Me, and it's because I got it in a bulk lot of records, and I
Yeah,
kept it. So I wouldn't, I haven't ever sought out the Black Sorrow stuff, but the Jojo Zep stuff's great. Yeah, it's got that pub rock kind of sound, that UK pub rock kind of sound. It's got a bit of ska in it, you know,
yeah. Shape I'm
and
In,
that's,
Hit and Run.
yeah,
I bought that single. I haven't got it any longer, but yeah, just love it. It's just really clever, catchy pop songs. Wilbur Wilde was in the
mm,
band, and they were just a really great band. So, but
yeah,
album cover completely different. So, what do you
yeah,
think? You like this, or do you
yeah,
like
no.
the panel?
I'd much prefer the original. When you first said you were going to do Jojo Zap, I thought you were going to do Hats Off Step Lively because that has completely different cover and a slightly different title as well. Because the overseas version is just called Step Lively. It's not called Hats Off Step Lively.
Maybe you can put that up as well. I've got the
Yeah.
album, but I've got the mushroom version. I don't have
Yeah,
the
yeah.
international.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I don't have that either, but I've got the Australian version too. But yeah, I'll quickly put those pictures up as well.
Very good.
So my next example is something that I was alluding to earlier, and that is where the Australian version of an overseas release gets cut down from a gatefold to a single sleeve. And it's so annoying. And the example that I've pulled for this one is an album I absolutely adore, and that is Hot Rats by Frank Zappa. Mostly instrumental, this album. It's getting into his sort of jazz fusiony stuff and all that sort of thing. That's the front cover, which is the same on the Australian one, which I'll show you shortly. But you get the back cover there is just another picture, you know, and you've got like a very faint track listing on the back there. But then you open it up and it's got all these sort of psychedelic pictures and what have you. So what the Australian cover did is they take that front cover and then they take half of that gatefold inner
Hmm.
and turn it into a single sleeve. So you end up with this and that on the back. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, single sleeve, no gatefold. And what would often happen with Australian albums too is they would leave out inserts, that inner sleeves and things like that. You would just get the plain album with the record inside and that sort of thing. Australian record companies were stingy in the 60s and the 70s and even into the 80s a little bit. And yeah, it was always a real annoyance that you'd find out that the overseas version was a gatefold and it had all these extra pictures and all this sort of thing. And yeah, it used to annoy the hell out of me.
I've got an example. I was
Mm.
gifted my late parents Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band single version, no
Yeah,
gatefold, and it was on the orange Parlophone label.
yeah,
And I still have it to this day. I play it occasionally, but there's nothing that beats the Beatles version, the glossy, folded up, and you can see the full Beatles in that the Pepper uniforms.
Yeah,
So we're
absolutely.
really getting gypped by not having that, you know. And also the original Sergeant Pepper had the inserts
Yes.
as well. So,
All right.
all right, my next one. Now, probably this artist I haven't spoken about on my channel or not your channel, so I think it's probably an opportunity to have a chat about this person. Burt Bacharach, great songwriter, very underrated, and probably had a bit of a revival in the last 20 years or so, especially with Elvis Costello, looking back at a lot of that late 60s music, because a lot of people there was lounge music was getting a bit of a revival, and people were exploring and listening to a lot of his stuff and thinking, wow, these are really tasty, well-crafted songs. Anyway, this is an Australian album called Baccarat Bonanza, but it is a combination and a hybrid of two albums called Reach Out and Make It Easy on Yourself. So it's a double album, and
Oh,
they're
yes.
sort of perpetuating, oh, it's a double album called Baccarat Bonanza, but it's actually two original Burt Bacharach albums that they've combined. There's Birdie Boy.
Mm.
Um, he sings a lot of the songs himself. He has the backing singers sing, and some of it's instrumental, but it's all part of pop culture. I Say a Little Prayer, A House Is Not a Home, The Look of Love, Pacific Coast Highway, She's Gone Away. Probably my favorite Burt Bacharach interpretation is Dusty Springfield. I think she was probably the it girl, the Eugene that interpret his songs the best. Um, do you have a soft spot for Burt Bacharach?
Oh yeah, I mean, great songwriter. Very his songs are deceptively complex musically. Like he uses a lot of um jazz chords and things like that in his songs that give it you know, the harmonies and that sort of thing. It gives it just a harmonic difference from a lot of other stuff that was in the sort of 60s pop world. And I love that about it. It gives it a sophisticated kind of feel. And yeah, absolutely, you know, I've got it's not by Burt Bacharach, but I've actually got the single of Herb Alpert singing This Guy's in Love with You, which I adore that song.
Hmm.
And you know, and that's a Burt Bacharach and Hal David song. And yeah, you know, beautiful, beautiful song.
Yeah, look, he was the king. Um, Late 60s was his golden period, but he did a film, a musical version of Lost Horizon, and it was an absolute flop. And his career sort of dived. And, people sort of, he put albums out, but they didn't trouble the charts or really sell. And it's really taken, like in the last 20 years or so, where artists like Elvis Costello were championing him and doing collaborations that he was brought back into consciousness.
Mm,
So I think good music is good music. People will rediscover it. You're in fashion, you're out of fashion, but certainly over the last 20 years, how many is no longer with us? A lot of people were rediscovering Burt Bacharach, but this is a prime example of
mm.
it's a bit misleading. But people will think, oh, it's a new Burt Bacharach album, and it's basically they've just combined two albums very sneakily and put it into one.
Yeah, yeah. No, good stuff, good stuff. The last example I'm going to show is an example of, and this would happen with Australian albums sometimes, when an overseas album would come into the Australian market, is that they would censor the album cover.
Mhm.
And the example I'm going to give is by a very early progressive rock band called Atomic Rooster. Now, you may not have heard of Atomic Rooster, but they're probably on their first album, they had a very young drummer by the name of Carl Palmer, who would go off after that first album and join Emerson, Lake and Palmer and become massive. Atomic Rooster were led by a troubled man by the name of Vincent Crane, who was the main songwriter and organist, and wonderfully talented guy, but a very troubled soul. This was, I've only got this on the CD cover, unfortunately, so I'll probably put the album cover up as well. But this is the original album cover. It's this rather strange bird with a pair of boobies. Now, when we got this album in Australia, they airbrushed the boobies out. People may not know this about Australia, but in the late 60s and into the 70s, Australia was a pretty conservative place. You know, it was a very conservative place. We had a conservative government from 1945 through to 1972, and then again from 1975 through to 1983. So, you know, for 35 years, except for a 3 year break, we had a conservative government in Australia. And we had a very, very conservative government here in Queensland, especially under Joe Bielka-Peterson. So, you know, they were very prudish. And so an album cover like this, yeah, they would censor it. They would airbrush it out. And so you ended up with the bird with a kind of a hollow chest instead. So still a really
Unbelievable.
good album.
Yep.
It's a really good album. Their second album is even better, which is called Death Walks Behind You. That's their absolute dead stone cold classic album. But they're you know, progressive rock trio, organ, bass, drums, and then they would become organ, guitar, and drums, and the bass would be played on the like bass pedals on a keyboard. And like by the time they get to Death Walks Behind You, they're very hard rock as well.
Mm.
So definitely an album worth checking out, as indeed is this one. It's a really good album, Atomic Rooster, and yeah, a good opportunity to talk about this band. But yeah, I mean, you know, prudish Australian record companies had to censor that cover.
Absolutely. And so, did you get the censored version first, or the uncensored version first? What was your order of purchase?
I had many, many years ago, and I was one of these foolish people who in the 90s got rid of most of his record collection because he thought CDs had taken over. But I used to have the UK version of that album on vinyl, and it was the uncensored version. And then in the last several years, you know, as I've been rebuilding my record collection and all that sort of thing, I got the Australian version with the censored cover. So,
Yeah, look, that could be a whole show. I've got so many of my friends went through the same experience as you, saying we got rid of our record collection in the '90s and we so regret it.
mm,
I think it's a familiar tale of woe.
yeah. All right, so there you have it, everyone. Those are
That was
some
good.
different album covers here in Australia as opposed to overseas. If you've got any examples of these, please do let us know in the comments. And they don't have to be Australian, just if you live in a country where you got an album cover variant, we'd love to see them. So
Hmm.
please do let us know in the comments. Peter, thanks for doing the show. It's always a pleasure having you on.
Absolute.
And if any of my viewers are not already subscribed to Rock Daydream Nation, go and rectify that immediately by going and subscribing. A link will be left in the description as always. Please do like, share, and subscribe here. It really helps the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. I have everything playlisted, so if you want to see some of my other special episodes, I have a playlist for those. If you want to see some of my panel shows, like the panel show that I've been talking about in this episode, I have a playlist for those. And if you want to see my appearances on other people's channels, like Rock Daydream Nation, I also have a playlist for those. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at bicyclelegs on Instagram, Twitter, and a bunch of other places. I also have a dedicated bicyclelegs Facebook page. Links are all in the doobly-doo. Please do give those all a follow and join in the conversation. I'd really love to have you there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
See you later.